A story in the Guardian newspaper this week describes the emotional breakdown of Joe Marler, who plays for the Harlequins rugby team in England. Muller was being interviewed because his book, Loosehead: Confessions of an Unprofessional Rugby Player, was just published. But that wasn't why the article captured my attention. I've never seen rugby in my life, except for a few scenes in the movie Invictus. I was drawn by the headline. I was in complete denial there was anything wrong with me, it said. 18 months ago, after a minor argument with his wife, Marler recalls, I snapped. We got home and I just spiraled and lost control. I turned over the kitchen, pushed in one of the doors. Then I got in my truck and drove off. Even his wife, Daisy, had no idea Marler was so depressed that he often cried while driving to training with the Harlequins. He explains, I didn't feel like I could tell her or anyone because I was in complete denial there was anything wrong with me. Marler was scheduled to play the next day. He tells the interviewer, my hand was in agony, so I texted the doc. When he saw me, he said, how did you do this? And I said, oh, I dropped a weight on it in the garage. There was a silence, and then he said, you haven't dropped a weight on this. I just melted. I broke down and said, I don't know what's going on, man. I feel awful. I'm a bad person. At first dubious, Marler began seeing a psychiatrist who prescribed an antidepressant. 18 months later, Marler is doing much better. Looking around the kitchen at the end of the interview, he says, it's a happy place again. It might be hard to imagine that someone who cries alone in his car on the way to work is in complete denial, as Marler calls it, that anything is wrong. At the same time, we know that denial is a powerful defense mechanism, and it serves a purpose. According to information provided by the Mayo Clinic website, if you're in denial, you're trying to protect yourself by refusing to accept the truth about something that's happening in your life. In some cases, initial short-term denial can be a good thing, giving you time to adjust to a painful or stressful issue. In many cultures, including ours, denial is even recommended as a coping strategy under the guise of keeping a stiff upper lip or looking on the bright side. Along with this well-meaning advice is the idea that admitting to our pain and showing our grief in public are considered to be a sign of weakness. The consequences of continuing to live in a state of denial can be severe. Refusal to seek medical treatment, staying in unhealthy relationships, allowing small problems to mushroom into catastrophes. And denial has spiritual consequences as well. When we hide our pain from others, we are also hiding it from ourselves, withdrawing from connection, cutting ourselves off from community. In her book, Lamentations and the Tears of the World, Kathleen O'Connor explains, when denial becomes a hardened way of life, it inhibits human flourishing, cuts off the spirit at its roots, silences voices, and blocks passion for justice. Denial constricts hope, depletes life, and aborts praise. She adds that denial interferes with our ability to feel compassion. Denial of our own pain blocks our capacity to perceive and take into our being the afflictions of others. To extend a gentle reception to the pain of others, we need a familiar knowledge of our own grief, anger, and doubt. No matter who we are, or whom we love, or where we are on life's journey, no matter what our political persuasion or position on the issues, it's hard to deny that the world has fallen away under our feet. When everything we've known and trusted seems to be crumbling, we come to a point where the coping mechanisms of putting on a happy face and soldiering on stoically only perpetuate the downward spiral, weakening our connections to one another and prolonging the pain. We need to set down our daily struggles, crack the brittle shells we've built around our hearts, and lament. As O'Connor describes it, the Book of Lamentations is about the collapse of a physical, emotional, and spiritual universe of an entire people. They lost loved ones, a way of life, and material well-being. They lost hope for the future and confidence in God. Walter Brueggemann writes, "Some believe the old promises of Yahweh to Israel and Israel's status as Yahweh's people, Jerusalem as Yahweh's city, are in jeopardy." There are 5 chapters in Lamentations. Each one is a poem mourning the Babylonian exile and the destruction of Jerusalem. Each of them has a structure based on the Hebrew alphabet. The first 4 are acrostics. The line of the poems each begin with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet in order. It's a way of putting some shape, some structure around the chaos of Jerusalem's pain, and a way of symbolizing that this suffering encompasses everything, the entire gamut from A to Z. We too have lost loved ones, a way of life, and material well-being. Millions of us around the world. In the US, we are losing hope for the future of our democracy and confidence in the political, social, and religious structures that we have relied upon to bring us through everything from wars to natural disasters to terrorist attacks. We too feel pain that seems to affect every facet of our lives from A to Z. By acknowledging this pain, by allowing ourselves to feel and express the extent of our grief, we open ourselves to the possibility of healing and reconnecting. Mourning allows us to let down our guard and let ourselves be seen as vulnerable. It softens our hearts, making intimacy possible. It honors and tells the truth about suffering, bearing witness to our pain and the pain of all who are struggling in these times. Without grief, we're cut off from the full expression of our emotions, the wholeness of life in its joy and sorrows. Grief opens us up to understanding the suffering of others, allowing us to cultivate and nurture compassion. Loss, death, grief. These are universal experiences that connect us all and offer us a chance to strengthen those connections through shared experience and understanding. And in our connectedness lies our strength. The first 4 verses of Lamentations 1, which we heard today, are addressed to Jerusalem by an anonymous narrator who describes her devastation, desolation, exile, bondage, and bitter distress. Lamentations chapter 1 continues to chronicle the depths of Jerusalem's despair. But verse 11 marks a shift from the second to the first person point of view. Jerusalem speaks. Look, God, see for yourself. See the disdain they show me. She continues alternating with the voice of the narrator through the end of the poem of lament, that is the first chapter of Lamentations. In naming her truth, in finding her voice, Jerusalem claims her agency. As O'Connor writes, to gain a voice means to come into the truth of one's history, corporately and individually, to recover one's life, to acquire moral agency by naming one's world. In Lamentations, Jerusalem is depicted as a woman, but in reality, Jerusalem is a city, a society, a people, bearing witness to each other's pain and standing in solidarity. O'Connor continues, laments create room within the individual and the community, not only for grief and loss, but also for seeing and naming injustice. Laments name the warping and fracturing of relationships. Because lamenting brings fuller recognition of the world as it actually is, it sets free unknown resources and passions for living and for justice. It can overcome the paralysis inflicted by trauma, oppression, and abuse. Laments are the beginning of action, a rejection of passivity, and so they can invert despair. Theologian C.S. Song relates a Chinese parable about the power of tears. A young couple was separated on their wedding day by the military, who forced Lady Meng's new husband to join the laborers building China's Great Wall. Like so many others, the husband never returned. Strong men went in search of the lost laborers and failed to find them or their remains. But when Lady Meng stood before the wall, her tears alone were strong enough to cause the wall to collapse and reveal the bones of her husband and the others who died building it. Lady Meng's tears were deeply personal, but they were also an act of political resistance. Her public, wordless lament unsettled the world's order. Her tears revealed rulers' atrocities and exposed the bones of the enslaved. With her weeping, the cover-up was ended, destroyed by a woman's powerful tears. Our collective tears are a form of strength, not weakness. And gathered like raindrops in a barrel, they can reshape the world as water wears down stone. If we open our hearts to one another and our own grief, if we dare to name our suffering in the face of injustice and bear witness to the suffering of others, wholeness, justice, and reconciliation become possible. Amen.